Hello friends, for today's video we are going to be talking about episodes 11 through 15 of the second season of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Apologies if I don't end up getting around to an episode that you, in your mind, categorize within episodes 11 through 15. These ones were broken up a little bit different. I don't know if when they originally aired, if there was a to be continued and it was sort of a two-parter that they combined into one long episode, because I did notice the runtime was a little different. But we're going to end this with the Tales of Ba Sing Se, which that episode was fantastic, so I'm really excited. That might be my favorite one of this batch, but that's where we're going to be ending. But that means that we don't have Appa back, and I'm upset about it, but we'll talk about that. I'm really bummed. It was fun answering comments and looking at comments and seeing a lot of you were like, oh, every time you mentioned loving Appa, I was predicting you were going to be upset, and I just feel like such a fool. I don't really. I just love Appa, and I'm really sad that Appa is still not with us, and to end it with Momo dreaming of Appa and being in what looks like an imprint of Appa's foot. Anyway, we'll get to that episode at the end. Sorry, I often put a T sound. Episode at the end. Starting with episode 11, The Desert, and Aang being understandably demoralized, angry, upset, numb about the fact that Appa is gone, and what a blow for him in particular. Obviously, he cares about his friends, he cares about his mission, but Appa has been with him. He's the only constant in his life, and even before all of this transpired, where he was frozen in ice and where we see the story begin, when we do look back, he had Appa back then. Obviously, that's how the two of them ended up frozen in ice. So there is this sense of almost betrayal and abandonment to some degree, or at the very least a sense of mistrust, or your guardians, the people that you look up to, not being who you thought they were because of the fact they were going to separate him from that sweet monk who wanted to protect Aang and still protect his innocence and his childhood, and still obviously help him grow as the Avatar, but he also wanted to be there for him and not just see him as this chosen one, and still see this is a human boy, this is a young person who still needs love and care. And that man was so sweet, but they wanted to separate them so that Aang could just be locked in and focused on his Avatar training. So there's already a lot going on. We've seen in previous episodes of Aang being pulled away from these people that he cared about, but he always had Appa, which I know it's not necessarily stated in that way. It's not like Aang explains it in that way, but I think they've given us a lot of visual indications. I think his reaction makes a lot of sense of this despair that he's feeling and that undercurrent of anger. So I appreciate the show showing that with him. Is it kind of morbid to say I always appreciate angry Aang? Not because I want him, I don't want things to happen that make him upset, but the show does a great job of showing characters as what feels like real people, showing the depth of these characters and different facets of their personalities. I think a good example, and actually one that's debated, it would seem, I discovered after looking at comments from last week, but Katara sometimes, even though she's usually the parent of the group, keeps everybody going, she can be very bitter and cruel. And there is that line that I mentioned last week about her saying to Toph when they're arguing, "The stars look so beautiful tonight, too bad you can't see them." I interpreted that as a blind joke, and not a joke really, she was just being cruel in that moment. But I guess other people view it as she forgets that Toph is blind because she's so capable, and she was referring to the fact that Toph had built this earth tent, essentially, for herself. So it's interesting that there's a debate among the fandom that I had no idea. My brain went straight to, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just said that. But even if we're putting that aside, we saw the way in the episode where she's being competitive with Aang with the water scroll. My point just being that I really like that the show doesn't shy away from showing these complex emotions and reactions in our characters, that Aang isn't this perfect individual who can keep his cool under any circumstances. You just took away the most important thing, basically, in his life. So I really appreciate that they're showing this, even though I wouldn't say this is it's not quite the same as far as the gut punches that we get in a lot of other episodes. I still feel like it served a really great purpose as far as what I wrote in my notes, because a lot of you know, unless you're new, that I write notes as I'm watching, my reactions, and then I relay them to all of you. So I put, aw, poor Aang, with a bunch of exclamation points. That's what I wrote in my notes for... I didn't have too much else. I put Aang's anguish with a sad face because it makes me sad. And then I said angry Aang, and then I put aw, poor Aang. So I didn't really have a lot of, speaking of complexity, I didn't have very many complex things to write down those were my very basic reactions, but still recalling, of course, everything that happens. I think there's a lot in this episode that, while not maybe something to pull apart like some of the other episodes we've gotten, I still thought was a really great episode. I do want to say there was a funny moment that I was amused by, which is at the beginning when you see Iroh and Zuko and those individuals. I'm spacing on what they're called, but they're Fire Nation people. Aang and them ran into them in the past, and then now you're seeing Iroh and Zuko run into them, and Iroh seems familiar with them to some degree, and he says about them, he's explaining to Zuko who they are, and he's like, oh, and they're also a very capable singing group. And I like all the random Iroh lines. I've stated before that I like that this show includes these random moments. Iroh's one of those people that it does look like he's a little bummed when Zuko maybe doesn't laugh at his jokes. You kind of see when they're training together. Iroh makes some kind of joke about the fact that he has more density, you could say. I don't remember what he said exactly, but he said something, and Zuko is just being brooding, as he pretty much is wont to do. So, but Iroh looks a little bummed when people don't laugh at his jokes or are jolly alongside him, but it also doesn't get him down. He's just always gonna say something silly and what's on his mind. He's so precious, which we need that in this episode when Appa's not here. I mentioned before that Katara is often kind of the parent of the group, and you see her in this episode as well take that upon herself, and not just that she has to be rallying everybody together in the same way she has before. She is really recognizing the sadness in the others, the way in which they're not all feeling the same thing, because obviously Aang is very upset and very understandably upset, and the other characters care about Appa as well, but it's not quite to the same degree. So she's having to kind of clock everybody's emotions and approach them all as individuals while still helping the group collectively. The end of the episode, though, I had even said last time, I was like, is Aang gonna go in the Avatar state for Appa and take out the people that took Appa? And so when he starts to go, I was like, oh my gosh, here we go. And then when he's crying and she's holding him, I was like, no. Anyway, I'll stop. I'll try to stop. I'll try to contain my sadness here. Episode 12, The Secret of the Fire Nation. So, I wonder if all of you can guess, were you amused when I talked about how much I hate Jet and just thinking like, just wait, because he's back, and I wrote in my notes, no, not Jet. I hate this character so much. I mean, I feel kind of bad for him, given what ends up happening in this series of episodes. But he's just, he's so frustrating. Anyway, so I also wrote Cabbage Guy. No, because, of course, his cabbage is destroyed again. And then Suki is back, which that was really exciting. I like the inclusion of characters we've seen before, minus Jet, but I do like that we're having new characters appear while simultaneously having characters that we've crossed paths with before, especially given that these are very prominent individuals. It makes sense. I do always think it's interesting in fantasy in general when you have these people or entire groups of individuals who are apparently these world-renowned soldiers or things like that, these well-known magic users, and then yet you never see them again except for this one time you cross through this one area. And I think that what I like about them crossing paths again is that it actually helps to make everything feel more complete. I think having characters introduced, because it is a journey, it makes sense that they're going to meet people and then move on. But when you have these returning characters, it makes it feel less episodic and like there is more cohesiveness across the story and the arcs. So I do like that. And I like this character in general. And then it did pretty much tell us this, but I did write in my notes as I was watching that Sokka is being so overprotective of her because of what happened with Yue, and he's having this weight on his shoulders like he failed her, he didn't protect her, and so now you're seeing him be overly protective with her. So I appreciated not that action necessarily, but once again that we're seeing this more the complexity that I was commenting on before. And then I wrote, feel your feelings, yay, hug, because Aang is, now he's gone from, okay, well, I got really upset, I got really angry, and, which I do want to comment on, I feel like his anger is justified, but I do think there's this idea sometimes, not in the show, I'm not saying the show is saying this, but kind of in society as a whole, that anger is removed from other emotions. Like if somebody is sensitive, it's because they become sad when things happen as opposed to being angry, but both of those are emotions and reactions. And Aang became very angry, and now it's like, okay, well, I need to shut everything off. And you're like, you don't have to shut everything off. You're still, it's okay to process, because at this point he's not processing what happened. So it's almost like stages of grief that he's experiencing right now, and he's almost not quite in a sense of denial. It's not like he thinks Appa's around or it didn't happen or like everything's fine, everything's gonna be fine. He's not really doing that. He's just muting everything or just completely suppressing it. So I think it's realistic that he would do that, as I think that's a reflection of what we do in our own lives. I think a lot of us do that often. Those really vulnerable emotions we are often scared to show, because when we're our most vulnerable is when it's easiest to get hurt again. Especially when you need comfort from others. There is that fear that when you show vulnerability, that you won't be comforted and then you'll feel rejected. So I think it's great that Aang, I feel bad saying it's great that Aang's struggling with this, but that's something that so many people experience, not just kids, but people throughout their entire lives go through phases where things happen that are devastating. And it was great to see that they do comfort him. That's why I wrote, yay, hug, because it was nice to see that they're there and that Katara was encouraging him to feel his emotions. And then I wrote Suki and Sokka, yay, because I like this character. I'm not going to go on a whole thing about how I didn't love Yue, and I feel bad comparing these two because they are pretty different characters. It's just that they are Sokka's love interests. But I did feel like, even before, when we only saw her in one episode, I felt like they did a lot with her just within that one episode, so to see her again, she feels like a really well done character for the brief amount of time that we get her. Episode 13, The Drill. This is the one that was kind of combined with episode 14, City of Walls and Secrets. So I'm just gonna treat this as two separate episodes. But again, I'm really sorry if you in your mind kind of see this as one. But for The Drill, there wasn't a whole lot to say because it's a very action-oriented episode, but I think I said this maybe last week, or at the very least I've said it at some point. I feel like this season's action scenes were a step above the previous seasons, which were already great, but I just feel like these ones are really good. And I wrote, Azula is annoying, but super cool. I kept turning to my husband and telling him, like, she's so frustrating, but she's also really cool. And the fight scenes, it's not just, I'm not saying she's cool in her personality. Like, isn't it great that she's so mean and cutthroat? I don't mean that. I mean that her movements and her prowess is something that's undeniable. I mean, she's pretty awesome in that sense, but she is still just, like, so snooty all the time, and I'm just like, ugh. So, anyway, the fight was so cool, and the way that they were trying to basically use their collective intelligence to try and take this drill out, and then also use their powers together to take this drill out. I ended up writing, destroying a giant drill shouldn't have been that cool. Because if you told me in a writer's room, like, okay, there's going to be this big drill that's going to try to get through this impenetrable wall, and they're going to destroy the drill, I'd be like, yeah, alright, that's... You guys figure that out, and I'll work on a different episode. I wouldn't have thought... That would feel like if you had a writer's room or different... I'm not saying this is how writer's rooms work, but I'm just saying if it was like a group project, and you had to draw from a hat who was going to be assigned which tasks. That would be the one that I wouldn't want. And then if they got it, it's like, do any of you remember in school when you would have some kind of boring assignment, and then you'd have those kids that went all out? They had no reason to, but they're like, I'm going to make this charming and awesome. And then there's like the dumbest thing that turned out to be amazing. I wish I could think of a specific example. I'm sure you can imagine that happening. But okay, I was about to say like a book report, which is ironic given that I do book reviews on my regular channel. But kid book reports are usually not extravagant, and I feel like there would be the occasional child that would go really off the walls with it, and then it was really fun. You're like, well, I just don't want to go now. I don't want to go after that. Anywho, my point being that an episode about destroying a drill should not have been so amazing, and it was. It was cool, and visually, like, I can still see Aang basically running up the wall and then running back down it and everything. Like, somebody needs to make a theme park. Is there such a thing? I want to. If there is, I need to look into this. But somebody, if it's not a thing, needs to... I got so excited I'm not even completing thoughts. If there is not a theme park that is Avatar inspired, can someone make it? I would go. That would be fun. Anyway, so episode 14, City of Walls and Secrets. So I kind of regret writing this, but initially I wrote, Ba Sing Se is awesome. And I'm sure it's very obvious why I regret writing that now. But I mean the architecture and the layout and the transportation. That's what I meant. And kind of in the same vein as the way I talked about the North Pole, the way it was designed and how they use their bending and their architecture and such things. The function of it all. That's the part I think is cool. I wasn't like, wow, this place seems... I'm not an enormous idiot. I wasn't like, everything seems peachy here. And that's cool that the lady is so... frightening. Aang with the whistle, with his little flying bison whistle. I wrote, oh no. And also, I'm sure that some of you are like, don't mention it, but I'm going to mention it. The whistling in Final Fantasy X. What is with these fantastic stories and whistling? Why? It always gets me. I also had to, of course, have a quote from... It's a couple of quotes between Iroh and Zuko about tea, which... Iroh and Zuko's plotline has kind of, I don't want to say it's died down, because it's not died down. It's just a lot of what's been going on with them. They've kind of traded. Aang's plotline, I think, has gotten to be a little bit more gripping and emotionally, I'm more emotionally invested at the moment, whereas Iroh and Zuko are kind of just nearby where Aang is, so you keep being like, are they going to cross paths? And you kind of are, well, okay, I do want to comment on the fact that I keep talking about there's these parallel paths occurring between Zuko and Aang. I feel like Aang's what I described as almost like denial in this section of the show, of the season. You could say that Zuko is experiencing it as well, just in a quieter way, which is kind of fitting for his character, because I don't think that he is where he was, obviously, at the beginning of the season, where he was trying to immediately get back to where he was, and he feels indignant almost that he doesn't have everything at his beck and call, and sort of this shame that he is at the bottom of the bottom, you could say. He's starting over. So I don't think he's in denial about that, but I just mean, like, he doesn't seem quite ready to accept his circumstances, so Iroh's sort of just pulling him along and being chipper, and Zuko's sort of there, which is not bad in any way. I'm not saying I think they've traded, now Aang's interesting and Zuko isn't. I don't mean it like that. I just mean that everything going on with them is a little quieter at the moment. So it's not that I have no thoughts about them. I just don't think that they're things I need to touch on too much. Anyway, so Iroh's drinking tea, and it's apparently awful. And he says, this tea is nothing more than hot leaf juice.
This tea is nothing more than hot leaf juice.
And then Zuko says, Uncle, that's what all tea is.
Uncle, that's what all tea is.
And then he said, how could a member of my own family say something so horrible?
How could a member of my own family say something so horrible?
It's just amusing that one of the angriest moments for Iroh was an insult to tea. Anyway, I wrote dictatorship ? question mark, question mark about Ba Sing Se, because I'm like, what's going on here? What's happening right now? Jet's obsession with Zuko is also, I mean, another tick in the column of Jet isn't my favorite. I mean, I get finding Zuko to be an interesting, fascinating character, but Jet's reaction to him is weird, and this need to prove they definitely are Fire Nation. But I wrote in my notes, well, first I wrote Jet's a loser. I also wrote, it sucks that Jet is right, but also, oh well. He just is that character that you're like, oh, he's just a thorn in everybody's side. Am I alone? Do other people, like, is Jet a fan favorite? I can't imagine that Jet is loved the way Toph is loved, unless Jet ends up being loved later. I don't know. But currently, he's just, no, I don't like him. I did immediately after writing, it sucks that Jet is right, but also, oh well, then write, what the heck? Because things get so bizarre. It's one of those situations where you're like, should the Fire Nation have gotten through? I don't know. I mean, I don't want any of the innocent people, which, given the design of the city, which, another thing to clarify, I don't like the way it's like, oh, the refugees just hang out here in this more slum-like area, and then us fancy people get to live it up. You know, I'm not a fan of that. And if the Fire Nation were to get through the wall, I would not want any of those people. I wouldn't want any innocent people, even though they're fictional. I don't want any of them to be harmed. But I'm also like, it kind of seems like we need to have a shift in power here, because this place is strange and it seems pretty awful. And then I wrote, threatening Appa, unforgivable. No, I'm so upset about this. Why is this happening? And then episode 15, Tales of Ba Sing Se, one of the best episodes of the whole show. This episode was so good. I really liked the way in which they formatted this episode, which is not a profound statement. It's obviously a different format than the others, but I liked that you have all these characters that are in the same location, and yet you're seeing them all individually. I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. And I also, every now and then, there are episodes that are a little more artistic and that they've taken a chance. And there are instances in certain shows where it doesn't really work out, and to me it feels like it was a little, they were trying a little too hard to hit that artistic note, and they end up abandoning things that otherwise would have made it more compelling. And I felt like in this, they certainly did not. It was artistic and had some of the most emotional moments, which I really appreciated. I liked with Katara and Toph, which this is an example, obviously, of it not being completely individual for each of the characters, as these two are together for this one. But I liked that you're seeing them come together, comfort each other, have this day together. And it's nice, too, because these two obviously butted heads previously. And it's not like all of a sudden everything's perfect. Now their personalities they're taking from each other and they've blended together and you hardly see them as individuals. They're still very distinctly different, but it's almost like the two of them are recognizing the value in having each other be who they are, and they're learning how to work together through that. And then, of course, those mean, dumb bully girls, they were awful. So I liked that they had kind of a moment where they got to stick it to them. And Katara was just really sweet. It was very sisterly between them, which I really enjoyed. It's not, I'm not going to rank the tales of Ba Sing Se, but the next one was very sad. I mean, it was so cute, Iroh being Iroh, and singing and being himself, and you're like, no, Iroh's nice. And I kept being like, when's this gonna become tragic? I just knew it was gonna be tragic. So I wrote Iroh is adorable, and then I put, oh, his son's birthday and the song the song he's singing. I was quite taken by that. It was very sad. And then I maybe am wrong about this. So in the next section, we have Aang with the animals. He creates this little sanctuary for them, which I thought was so sweet and very fitting for Aang. But I also wondered, they played music in the background that kind of sounded like the theme that you hear in the intro, or maybe it's the outro or both. But it almost sounded like a sad version of it. And I could be wrong. Maybe I just misheard it and would need to listen again. But I would be curious if it's kind of almost a reflection of how Aang is feeling internally, even though he's outwardly looking more optimistic, happy. He's trying to have hope. He's trying to move forward while still, of course, looking for Appa. I just wonder if there is sort of this sort of hidden sadness in him and it's reflected in the music. But that could be a complete reach. Sokka's is dumb, of course. It was fitting of Sokka. Sokka has moments where he, of course, like I was talking about before, where he is being overly protective and you understand why. They, I guess, didn't feel the need to be too deep with him here, which they didn't need to be. I think it made sense that after some of the harder to watch parts of this episode, we have some comedy with Sokka here, especially because the end, but before I get to the end, we have the Zuko one where he basically goes on a date with a girl, and I was so amused when he first comes up to Iroh and he's like, we're being followed, we've been discovered, and then Iroh's like, I don't think that's what's happening. I was like, Zuko, you're so oblivious. And he's so bad on his date. He reminds me a little bit of Cloud from Final Fantasy VII for anybody that likes video games, because they're both just very brooding. They never seem like they know what the right thing is to say. They come across very cool, but at the same time, you're like, you're kind of an idiot. So he's, not the best at dating. He's kind of, he's not exactly a charmer by any means, but he has this cute little where he lights everything up, and you're like, no. And then at the end, when he's like, going home and he seems all grumpy and Iroh's like, how was your night out? And he's like, it was fine. And then he goes to his room and then he's like, I had a nice time, or whatever he says. Like, he says something along those lines. I didn't write the exact quote, but basically like, I had fun, it was nice. And I've been saying for so long, can't Iroh and Zuko just go live somewhere and be happy together? And I just know they're gonna take it away. Of course they are, because he's finally starting to have a sense of normalcy and peace, and he's finally coming to accept his new role in life, or the new ways in which he is choosing to live. He's like kind of finally accepting, and I'm like, I know they're not going to let him have peace, because like what he said with the lightning, like it always comes back. Basically, life is always cruel to me, and I know it's going to happen again, and it's upsetting. And then the last one with Momo, and at first it's shenanigans, and then it's like, no, I just want Appa back. Why am I having to end another batch of episodes with wanting Appa back? I'm pretty sure I turned to my husband. I wasn't by any means asking for spoilers, but I think I was like, are we getting Appa back? Why have we not gotten... I think I just was probably shouting at him, basically. To conclude, I really enjoyed this batch of episodes, and I am pretty sure I can safely say that my assessment in the first batch of episodes for this season, when I said I'm hoping that the couple episodes that were sort of not my favorite were just little hiccups, and that from here on out it's just going to be an upward trajectory, I think that that's still the case, and I am so excited because it's been so good, and then we'll be able to talk about the last chunk, and then it'll be on to season 3, which I'm really excited about. But I might still do a tier ranking of this season similar to what I did for season 1, and I'm just bringing this up because even now, not having talked through, everything, even just what we've gotten through to this point, I don't know, because last time I limited my top tier to make it a challenge for myself. I could only put 3 episodes in the top, and I'm trying to think about what my top 3 would be, because there's so many great moments, and I think the Tales of Ba Sing Se was up there for me as being one of the best. I really loved that episode. I like the chance they took, and just in general, I feel like it's all around been great. I mean, maybe if I was being like just stupid, I would be like, well, Appa wasn't in these, so I guess that makes it go down or something to just simplify the process. But anyway, I'm very curious, what is your favorite from this section? Are there notable moments that you really love that you want to expand on? But I'm really enjoying this. I am nervous. I'm excited. I want Appa back. And I'm just having, as always, a really great time getting to chat through with all of you. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for continuing to chime in. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.